All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. We are so grateful that you are joining us. We are in our fourth leadership study, part of the 8 Steps to Your Leadership Rebuild. I'm Shreya Kawet with CWLI. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Kristie Wilder on the topic of focus. Challenge your talent for the greater good. It's going to be a really, really good discussion. If any time you have questions during this session, feel free to use the chat box or just raise your hand. We're going to make this as engaging as possible. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to April. She serves on our program advisory board and connected us with Dr. Wilder. So I will let her make those introductions this afternoon. Thank you, April.
Thank you. Full disclosure, Kristie and I are very, very good friends and our families do life together. So I am going to tell you one of our personal stories. So we both had our babies and we are both pushing our strollers down the road. And I am deciding to quit practicing law to be a stay-at-home mom. And she is on maternity leave and has been given the opportunity to advance and become dean of her department at her college where she teaches. And so she decides to lean in and she takes the bull by the horns and she does an amazing job. She does all of the budgeting. She does all the hiring and firing. She puts out all the fires. She still teaches graduate students and takes them to DC and to Nashville to talk about policy because, she also has a law degree in addition to having a doctorate in social work. And then she also is an amazing volunteer. She is one of the women who was on the committee for Mayor's Council for Women who brought the policy conference here. She was part of a group who retained a professional to fly down here and teach women how to run for office. And 2 of the women that ran now sit on the county commission and the city council. So she is professionally amazing. But her kids started getting older and she started to want to hang out and do family things more, do the recitals, do the baseball things, do all the things, because each phase of life has a different focus. And she wanted to switch her focus and move into this very precious small time in life. So she stepped down as dean. She's still a full-time professor. She's still amazing. She still does all of the volunteer work. She's still a passionate advocate for women. But I think that there is no better woman to exemplify the modern professional and personal and whole woman. And so with that, I hand it over to Kristie to give us all of her wisdom.
Oh my goodness, that is the most wonderful introduction and unexpected personal. I'm like, I'll start crying before I even get started.
Right, no CVs here.
No bios. I told her, I was like, don't read my bio, whatever you do. I don't know about you all on here, but the whole reading of the bio thing is not fun to hear. And so she's like, I would never do that. I'm like, I didn't think so. It was like 10 minutes before. I'm like, I really didn't think so. But I also didn't expect that. That was the warmest introduction ever. And I'm not sure I can live up to that, but because I am definitely more of a doer. I like to get out there and have my boots on the ground and get the work done. I'm really bad at talking about what I do. And sometimes I have to pause and stop and think like, what is it that I even have to share with people? And what is it that they can really learn from this? So that, with that said, I will definitely encourage you, as already has been said, that this is a time of sharing. I know Zoom has put us in a place of this virtual land, but these events have always been really great for networking, and I don't want that to be lost in this experience. So One thing that I do not do in the classrooms, and that is I am not known for being lecture based. So all my classes are practice based classes. That means that we are learning together, and I would love for the same experience today. Many of you probably can bring more to this discussion than I will. So I won't even say interrupt me, because it won't be an interruption. Just interject, jump in if you have a question. Of course, the chat box is open, as sometimes I might get lost managing that. So also feel free to unmute yourselves. So I think this is a really great opportunity that CWLI has given to our community to be able to talk about resetting our leadership. I think as women, we get really busy in all of the shuffle, and we can just do the things and do them well, but lose our why behind that. And so not only today, but I think in the last three, the previous sessions that they have been really great opportunities for you all to just kind of, and for myself to kind of rethink about what it means for us to be leaders. And when we talk about leadership with women too, I think I don't want to leave out moms. I don't want to leave out mentors. I think every single woman has an opportunity to be a leader in their communities with other females and younger generations. So that's a big part of what will be included in our discussion today. So before we get started, I wouldn't mind if you all would just populate the chat box with which organizations you're representing, or if you're not representing an organization, sort of your passion, your area for leadership and women. I would love to kind of know who I'm talking with today. I recognize Marcy. I would sure love to see your face. It's good to see you on here. I recognize several of your names, but if you would just share who you're representing, that will give us an idea of who is here today. As has already been shared, I am a professor here at Southern Adventist University. I'm a social work educator, so I have the privilege of teaching graduate and undergraduate students. All right, Blair, EPB. Blair, you probably know David DiBiase, who is my law school buddy. We commuted for 4 years together. Okay, more EPB. Stephanie, JP Morgan. Oh, Marcy's still connecting to audio. Well, tell him I say hello. David's a great guy. Okay, well, good. It's sort of that you guys have very different backgrounds from each other and from me, which is really good, and will make this a rich discussion. So one of the things I'm going to say from the outset is I'm pretty non-traditional in terms of how I think about leadership. There are tons of leadership theories. There's every kind of personality test to take out there to identify what type of leader that you want to be. And there's all sorts of leadership styles. They're all helpful, and I have to use all of them in my macro classes with my students. They are invaluable, but something tells me I am probably talking to a group of women who are very well versed on leadership styles and leadership theories. So we're going to take a little different approach. One of the things I love about the overarching theme of this series is it's the rebuild. So we're going to kind of throw out some of those old things, not talk about leadership styles and try to rebrand those. We're going to just go a totally different direction. Because when I think about leadership, it applies to so many areas, and the tool that we're going to use today, I think, will help us with that for sure. I also thought about getting into the weeds with data, but I was thinking of this more as a networking opportunity and assuming that we all know the status of women, especially here in Tennessee. And to be honest, we're failing, and we have failed for quite some time. So that's not always the most fun data to look at. But I will just say, I think as we go forth in this discussion, let's all remember that women make up more than 50% of the population, both nationally and here in Tennessee and here in Chattanooga. But we continue to have representation in elected positions, appointed positions, on boards, as executives in the 20 to 30% range, almost across the board in all of those areas. So that's why we have these spaces for us to talk. That is still not a good representation. And why that is, we could all talk about that. And I'll be touching on that a little bit from the context of which I come. Higher ed especially is one of those. It still only has like 30% female representation on full-time faculty. That is a meager 5% increase over the last 75 years. So we have a lot of work to be done. But I think what women need to have the freedom to do, and that's what I love about how April included some of the things that she did in the introduction, is that we just got to be ourselves. Sometimes, as Sheryl Sandberg says, that's a jungle gym. We're not always climbing up. We're climbing, horizontally, vertically, and we're also bringing who we are. Like women have a different approach, and I think it is time that we just lean into that. So I'm going to pull up my presentation with all of that said. And we're going to talk about the greater good, which is a pretty big ask. So let's start with a very cliche question. Why am I called to lead? So I put that out here knowing that is cliche, and we all kind of think about that from time to time. However, in the topic that we're going to be discussing today, it's important because the skill that I hope you leave with either A, will help you to reevaluate why you're leading, or maybe for the first time in a while, actually be reminded or know why, or recognize that your reason has shifted and altered. I know for me, that's happened in my short 10 years here at the university. It's shifted many times, and my different places and contexts of leadership has shifted. And so I do want this in the back of your mind, because we're going to be discussing the public narrative. It's a tool for helping us to know how to tell stories. And that's not often what we think of as a leadership technique. And so I want you always applying it to leadership and to the reason why you lead. Is there anyone, I'm going to just put it out there because I'd love to hear from you. Is there anybody who just has a strong desire to share why they lead or why it's important to you? I know there's always the risk of people not, I'm used to this. These are my students. I just can't, actually evaluate you. So I have nothing, nothing to hang over your heads. And that's fine too. I know we're often multitasking.
I'll say something.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm called to lead is because I feel other people need help, not because I actually want to lead.
Yeah. I can really resonate with that. And Steph, that's a quick way. We talk about that a lot in the social work industry. It's a quick way to burn out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm actually in the process of releasing my direct reports to somebody else, because I raised my hand and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. But I'm still going to be in a coaching role in JP Morgan, and then still have my own book of business and what I do. But yeah, it's a quick way to get burned out.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually what you are sharing, I think what we're going to talk about is going to fit in really well. So I'm hoping we'll circle back to you maybe towards the end, or that you can even interject as we go along, because I think this is kind of addresses some of that a little bit. So anybody else want to jump in? Okay, well, we're just going to keep on moving. So going back to what I was saying about women in leadership, I read an article a couple of years ago, and it talked about how MSW, which is a master's in social work, was going to be the new MBA, which I wasn't fully convinced when I read it, but I got the essence of what they were saying. And basically it was because, organizations, corporations are recognizing that people skills, understanding human relationships is more valuable in the workplaces in any organization than the actual technical skills. And folks were saying, we'd rather, or actually it's not even rather, it's that we can train technical skills. We can't always train the people skills. Well, my takeaway from that is certainly not what the article said, but my takeaway is that 90% of social workers are female. We are a very female dominated industry. There's far less females with MBAs than there are MSWs. So the honest truth is, my hypothesis is that everything is better when it's ran by a woman. And I think it goes a little bit to this head heart. And that's what I was saying when we started is women got to be women. The whole thing about don't cry, but then, whoa, did you see, I remember when Chief Fletcher was our chief of police and he cried in a meeting and everybody was so moved and touched that he cried. And I thought, if I had cried, everybody would talk about how weak I was, and so this idea that we are emotional beings. And I think if we can embrace that and lead with emotional intelligence, it brings a unique perspective that's not always on the table. And it's one of the reasons I love the model I'm getting ready to introduce to you all, because it says there's two ways to understand the world. We have our head, and it is important to have strategy and analysis. And kind of going back to Stephanie, who's doing everything for everybody else, she's bringing in the heart. That's her motivation. And part of how we connect the analysis and the strategy, all the work we do is through story. Story is really what motivates. Hearing somebody's story can resonate with us. And we work towards the shared purpose by combining our head and our heart. As Brene Brown always says, we're emotional beings first, and then we think. And I think that's very true. There's a lot of wisdom in letting your emotions drive your process, because there's so much intelligence. We wouldn't call it emotional intelligence if it didn't serve a purpose. And so values inspire our action through emotions. We do not think. Like, I don't know if you've ever read Nussbaum, but she does a lot of great writing about emotions and our judgments and how we need to trust them a little bit more, because we talk about values guiding our decision making, values guiding our leadership styles. Values are really at the foundation to most everything that we do. In fact, I've gotten where I don't even use the term family life balance anymore, because I think it doesn't exist. But I just use a value balance term. If I'm value balanced, am I putting, relationships and people and passions that matter, prioritizing those things, then I'm living in balance. Values are so important, but they come from our emotions. So really the things that are the most important to us are coming from our emotions. And yet we continue to want to repress our emotions. They inform us of what is really important. Then we act on those things, and we do have to strategize. I believe in objectivity, critically analyzing, having a plan, but we can't fully do that and harness the real power of moving things forward, moving change forward, if we don't first let our emotions guide us towards the values that are most important. And how do we express our values? Through stories. Think about it. Anytime we're talking, even in the introduction today, April gave a perfect example of using story to express values and to create a shared experience of all of us who are listening to her. We could all identify as women with some piece of the story that she was sharing. And it's about as simple as that, as we start to create. So what are we going to talk about today to add to our leadership toolbox? It is the public narrative. Has anyone heard of the public narrative model by Dr. Gans at Harvard University? Is anyone familiar with it? I absolutely love it. It is translatable to any setting. So as I referenced before, I teach policy classes. I also teach community and organizational practice. And so they're all what we call very macro social work type courses. We have to do a lot of advocacy in the policy realm. The most important thing to do, or to most important skill set to have in any advocacy, but especially policy, is the ability to tell story. There's nothing political about a story. It's a quick way to connect, to make a human connection, that relational connection that we can make, finding overlap in our values and being able to kind of reach across the aisle, no matter where we come from on our political spectrum. If we use stories, we can find a connection point, diffuse our differences, start with our commonalities, and then work towards the change where we may need to actually act on. And so I'm a big believer. It's also used in a lot of leadership literature, in this model. And so really it's used to help us find our purpose. And it has to begin with the story of self. And I don't know if any of you all remember back in 2004 when Barack Obama hit the stage for the first time prior to being president, and he was addressing the DNC. What he used was the public narrative model to introduce himself to the nation. He started with his story being raised by a single white mom, father from Kenya, built this beautiful narrative, the story of himself, and was really building up a platform for him as a leader. Because what happened when he did that, it became the story of us. And this is not an endorsement of any political, it's just a perfect example of where we're going with this public narrative. And so as the nation listened to that story, there were so many pieces of shared values and shared experiences that it became, and it grew to be a story of us for multiple people across the United States, right? And so it spread into the community. Well, then we would not want to have a model that does not include action. I would not talk about any model that does not leave us acting on something. The urgency piece moves us towards action, right? So like, what is it now that we have figured out our purpose and our reason and our values and why these things matter to us, and now we have shared purpose, what are we going to do about this? You create your strategy and action out of this model. So before we break down the story of self, us, and the story of now, I just bear in mind, it does use a story structure. If we had if I could keep you for 2 hours today, what we would really do is workshop this, and you would get to develop your story of self, because that's such an important piece of this. We don't have that kind of time. So what I'm doing is just going to be, it's a basic introduction to this concept. And then if you want more materials or any more details, I can even give you worksheets for, your organizations, if that'd be helpful, to work on building out these stories. But of course, we all know this is nothing new. Every story has a plot. That plot includes a character who has a challenge, that they have to make a choice, right? And that choice leads to an outcome. All of that is you're connecting and empathizing, and you are often empathizing with that moral, or it resonates with you. So those are the main premises of a story that we'll talk about kind of developing, being able to create a challenge that people can listen to and be motivated to act on towards change. Think about that in your organizations. What's a challenge that maybe has happened recently? And the choice that you as the leader or your managers or supervisors or someone has had to make these choices, did it get you to the outcome that you wanted? Was a story actually told in that process to move others along towards that outcome? Or did people just act on it? There's a big difference. And that's sort of why this model works so well, and why I think women are really good for this model. Now, it does require a little bit of vulnerability. And I'll be honest, it's the part I'm the most uncomfortable with, because I don't like to just talk about story or myself, or I just want to know what we need to address and move on. But the reality is, and that's why I get to teach it, I get to just tell my stories, my students to tell their stories, and then I just listen. But the real truth is that we have to invite others into our stories in order for them to be able to be moved towards the change and the action that we want to see happen. This is very important. This is why I was saying when I talk about leaders, I'm talking about moms as well, or mentors. Think about this model. Are there challenges that arise in your family and you're willing to share that story and explicitly make it clear what choices the family is making and why, and bring your kids along on that journey towards that greater outcome for the family? This can happen in any setting. It can mobilize change in a community where there's a social issue that's, we're actually piloting this with the eviction prevention initiative that started a couple of years ago here in Chattanooga when Emily O'Donnell, prior to her being city attorney, and she wanted to see if we could create a model with attorneys and social workers helping to prevent evictions. And so we just went at it for 2 years, but now we're on the other side of that with some great outcomes. But we need to hear from the tenants themselves who are now housing secure, right? So we're helping them learn how to tell the story, not us. So the tenants are getting to build their story that builds out into their community, that we're hoping then becomes the story of now the action is it getting to city council and to places where we need budget and more action for the affordable housing. So that's another example that's outside of corporations, outside of families. It applies anywhere. So whatever setting you're coming from, I believe being able to craft these stories to work together towards change can be very powerful. So once you build that story of your own story, and it gets shared, in that process, people hear it and they connect to something, right? Just by the nature of them saying, oh, think about sometime when any type of women's movement, this is what's happened. People were telling their story when they were left out of being able to vote, right? And that one story led to the story of us, which led to that action that we're talking about. That's really what moves us. And then it inspires others. So it's different than telling somebody we're going to do this, we have to do this. It's inspiring people to choose to do it, right? And creates community while we do it. And I love this quote because I think it kind of brings out the point about this. I'm a white man living a white man's world. Under our roof is a baby girl. I thought this world could be hers one day, but her mama knew better. There's no such thing as someone else's war. And I think that's often the approach that we take, is like, if it doesn't affect me or I'm not impacted by it, then it's not my problem. I don't need to act on this. But I think in this model, if we use this as leaders, that we can inspire people to act towards change. This should not be a woman's issue. When women are trying to get more representation, we need everybody at the table for that. So how do we tell our story in a way that inspires everybody to want to act towards that? Which reminded me, these are my boys, but they're 6 and 8 years old now. So they're like 1 and 3 here. And it's a little fuzzy, but this was taken on the day, and actually April's daughter was with them somewhere. We were at the Women's March, the first one that happened here in Chattanooga. And it was quite an experience for them. And this is right at the end, Ace, who's waving at the camera. We were putting him in the car. And he looked up and he said, when is there going to be a boys' march? And I said, I was just kind of joking. I said, well, the boys have been marching for forever. And my husband had a much better response. And his response kind of harkens to what I was just sharing. He said, this is our march. We marched for Mama, we marched for Rose, for Pearl, all the women who we know. This is everybody's march. And I thought, what a better answer. But that's essentially what we're trying to build, right? A movement towards action on these things that are really important to us, where there's shared values. And it's not just because it's my issue, but it's the greater good, which is what we were called to look at today. So the key of building the story of us, though, is to be very specific. So we know where we're headed with our story. We know who it's talking about. You want to specify the time. It gives you direction. There is truly, this is why we could workshop this, because there's truly some practice that it takes in developing a story when used in a way that will help with leadership. Also, this quote is here because one of the biggest things about the story of us is building empathy, right? So taking the perspective that everybody has the capacity to empathize. If we think of it from that perspective, rather than, oh, they'll never understand, or they don't care, or, some people have social empathy, some people don't. Using this model has helped me to practice that perspective of everybody has the capacity for empathy. It's how we engage that process, and how we give them an opportunity, and are we courageous enough to share these stories in a way that will awaken empathy in this process, so that it is the story of us. The story of now. So here we are. This is an urgent challenge. The story of now means we have resonated. We have built towards a shared value, and something needs to be done. But in doing this, it also builds a hope. And it's not just a hope that that we can face the challenge, because it's a challenge, but also that the outcome can actually be achieved, right? So we want to use that hope in the way that we engage people, so that folks will make a choice to choose to act now. So I'm going to stop sharing because I'd like to not have. And I'm going to sort of give an example. I'm going to do the little story of self that I don't typically do. We didn't even talk about this. She had no idea what I was talking about, but her introduction fed right into this piece of it. So I was dean in the department for 6 years, as she said, and she was one of the many voices that fed into to my mind as I was trying to make the choice of whether I should do this. And she was like, do it. And then when I was like, I'm ready to step down, she's like, do it. So I was doing the thing, and I was 2 years in. So when I got, asked, I had an infant. 2 years in, and we're pregnant again, or just a little less than 2 years in. And I thought, oh my goodness, it was a real surprise pregnancy. But that's okay. We had figured it out. We had a nanny with the first one. The first one was getting ready to head to Montessori preschool. And this is all going to be okay, because we have figured out how to do childcare, all the things. Well, my second born decided that he was not going to take bottles. He would not take bottles. And if I were you listening right now, I would think, well, yeah, you do this, this, and this. And I can tell you, we did that. And we bought every bottle, and I was pumping. It wasn't like we're switching him to formula. We did every bottle. We did it early on, knowing his personality now, it totally makes sense that this is what he chose. And so it was about 4 weeks from heading back from maternity leave and back into my dean post. And I looked at my husband and I said, this isn't, I mean, we can't just hope the week before that this is magically going to work. So we quickly changed our plans. Oh yeah. Okay. I got some solidarity out there from a mom. And we had to not do in-home nanny like we thought, and found a student to come to campus and watch him on campus. And every time he needed to feed, he came to my office. Professional? I don't know. But that's why I'm saying, you do what you got to do. I'm going to say, that's why I say I'm very outside the box. Women, if it keeps you at the table and it works for you, then you do it. Part of the problem of being a member of a subordinate group, as women are, that we live under the dominant culture's rules and decisions. And did I make some people feel really uncomfortable having my child here and having a curtain on my window for when I was nursing? Absolutely. I mean, I was just holding my baby one day and a male colleague walked in. Oh, I can come back. I'm like, I'm fully dressed. I don't know what is like, this is not awkward. Like we have children. And anyway, so this was a really unconventional time for me. I felt I shamed myself a lot. Like, oh my word, this is unprofessional. All the thoughts that we have that go through our head. But then also at the same time, I leaned into this model because what's happening, whatever it is that I communicated as a leader in this department who had, we're 7 females and 1 male in our department. Then I would message that to everyone else. And there was another mom who she had her baby 1 month after me. So we were thick into, and we had another mom who had a 1-year-old. So I recognized very clearly that I had an opportunity and how I messaged this was going to impact them. And so my story became the story of us in our little school of social work department. And that I was able to create a space where we had a full office space that was just for children. They had toys, just everything that children needed. We didn't have to take it in and out. We put a little fridge in there. We didn't ask the provost or anybody for permission. I don't know if that was okay, but we did it. Meantime, there was a colleague in another department who had a child and ended up quitting because she couldn't even find a safe place to nurse her child, where she could be in privacy, And so by me being able to vocalize and say to my faculty, here's what I'm doing. If at any time it disrupts or interrupts anything that we are doing, or if students hear my child cry, please let me know. And as we built that out, sometimes I had him in the ergo and I teach my classes. It ended up role modeling to the female students that this sometimes is what that family balance looks like with work. Maybe made them think they don't ever want to do it. And it also ended up role modeling to the faculty that, all right, instead, let's act on this and let's change the trajectory of what is happening in higher education. Because remember what I said, 31% of females or 31% of faculty, full-time faculty in higher ed are females. There is a reason, folks. There are reasons that we need to look at our statistics. When I was in law school, I think 46%, so that was 2006, 46% of law students were female. That's not a terrible percentage. If you look at the percentages of females practicing law, it's 36%. Are they capable? Of course. The statistics of female students in our university are over 60%. Females are nationally represented at higher levels than males. But they're not, this goes back to the representation. They're not there. Is that because they don't want it? They're not capable? It's because in these moments, in this small little example of my story that could translate to so many other examples, we have to speak out. We have to be the change. And it can happen through something as simple as story. That's why I say this, we don't talk about this a lot in terms of how to be leaders, but it may not be your story that can become the story of us, but as a good leader, we'll identify somebody who has that story and who can build and maybe even make organizational change. And then you become a part of their story. So as leaders, we don't have to feel the burden. In my example, I unfortunately was like the experimental project, but it could have been that it was a faculty member. And then you bolster their story. The bottom line is that we need to be acting on the urgency of change when it is needed. When there's a challenge, when there is an issue, how do we address it? Do we have the tools? Yes, we do. Women can do this. And this is one of the best models that I have found for being able to really structure it in our mind and have a tool or to empower other people to see how to create these narratives that will change how we do things. If we continue to stay silent, we continue to shame ourselves, we are just giving in to the messages that have been there for so long. So I am going to, as April kind of alluded to, I was, after 6 years, I was done with deaning. So after I tell you that, and I figured out all this way to keep my child on campus, I did have a wake up call in terms of my children growing and just missing out on things. The older they got, the harder it got. And that was a real crisis. And I just share this for some of you who might struggle with that. And the majority of my students are females. And so what I teach in class and what I bring students out to do with me in the community is all female empowerment. It's very like, you can do it and get out there. And they are very aware of any type of elections where women are running. And we talk about it in the classroom. So my crisis also just spilled over into what I had messaged to the students. Was I giving them the wrong message? And so I am actually going to just read a little excerpt from my announcement to my students. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I felt unless I messaged it, I was not doing them a really good favor. And I needed to be really honest with why I was stepping away. I try not to say stepping down. I had a colleague pull me aside and she said, women do not say stepping down. You're choosing something even bigger. And I thought that was really good advice. So I passed that on too. Over the past 6 years, I've had the privilege of leading the School of Social Work as dean. During that time, it's also been my good fortune to become a mom to 2 precious boys. With an eye to a better family life balance, I have made the decision to change my role from the dean position to full-time professor. Being Ace and Jude's mom has changed me and caused me to grow as a person and a professional. My beliefs have evolved and solidified as I recognize that being a professional woman in our society requires a balancing act at work and home. Making this change may seem at odds with what I've been telling young women in my classrooms, that you can do it all. The reality is that even if you can do it all, and I know a lot of you out there are doing that, it is not necessary to do it all. We all have choices. To choose family is not a compromise. It is not sad or unfortunate, or even more, it is not substandard. These societal assumptions won't change if we pretend they don't exist. To borrow from Sheryl Sandberg, I'm leaning in to my family and to balance. I'm immensely grateful that returning to my post as professor will allow me to continue to do work that I care so deeply about while also choosing a better balance for my family. So my story that started with the challenge of how to work with my kid at work, we resolved that, we acted, we made a better working place for other moms. I'm very proud of that. But you know what? My challenge shifted and my story shifted. And that's part of this model too, is it won't always be the same challenge. And that's sort of why I planted that cliche question at the beginning of why you're leading, because why you started doing what you're doing, why you're leading may not be the same today. Or maybe you did it because early on we all have to prove ourselves and we just, want to be using all the education that we got, and then we have no passion and we have no value-based reason for why we're leading. Or going back to Stephanie, doing it for others. What is Stephanie's values? What are her challenges and passions that she wants to address? And sometimes that simple act of creating your own story will bring that back to life for you. I'm going to go back here. So I feel like this quote kind of sums up the model very well. If I am not for myself, who will be? And if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? Almost sounds like the public narrative model, right? So what is your story and why keep that to yourself? It's not vain to share that. It may empower somebody. It may lead to being a story that's shared among a community of women. And then you'll have an action item to speak. I mean, I can remember doing women work with April a few years ago. We didn't know if others would join us, but what started with our stories, our experiences, suddenly we were sitting in the living room with 10 other women who were feeling the same feelings and the same concerns and wanted to act on the challenge that we were experiencing at that time. That's how you build on movements or move towards change, shared stories that create shared experiences and shared values. And then you're able to act on that. So I just want to leave with this thought: the story we tell becomes the world we live in. And this is true and this is one of the things, I don't know if you all have heard of the Op-Ed Project, but they're a wonderful group of women who, because there's only like, I think 20, I don't remember the percentage, April, you might remember, 21% of editors or leading newspapers and journalistic sources are women. And so one of the tragedies in our society is that whoever writes our editorials is really writing the narrative for the nation, writing the narrative for your community. It really matters who is writing. I mean, that's just one other area of underrepresentation that we have. So I really picked up on that concept through their training and appreciated how they talk about story form, partly because I have a passion for using story for eliciting change. And so it doesn't have to be through writing editorials, but that is one way. There's so many ways, but it all begins with telling the story, whether you use the statistics to tell the story and to show who's being left out. When I'm talking about women and talking about change, and when CWLI was so bold to put greater good in the title, I think that's comes with, we got to know what we're really talking about. Greater good can only happen when we include the intersectionality of queer women, Black women, Hispanic women, women living in poverty, women who are uneducated. Like, we don't elevate ourselves if they are not elevated. And so if we're only telling our stories and not empowering them to tell their stories, then we're also egregiously writing half of a narrative. I think that's an important piece, not just men doing us a disservice. We can do a disservice to each other, but these stories are so important. And I'll just add, because we all know that if women are not asked to run for office, they never will. So I like to kind of end everything with making sure that somebody's asked you to run for office or think about writing an editorial, or all of that's important. And writing stories is a big part of running for office. So, you have this tool. I've worked with people who want to run for office, and I give them this model. I'm like, oh, you need the public narrative model, because once you craft that story of yourself, you're ready to share it to your community or wherever you are and get people to join you in your movement. And then your act in that case might be running for office. So, there's lots of ways to apply this, ladies. I've put my contact information here. If you want any other material or just want to talk more about this, or I've got some worksheets if you'd like to workshop any of the crafting of the stories that we use in the classroom, that I would be happy to share with you. But I did want to leave a little bit of time for questions. I don't know if folks have any comments or anything that they want to share. I tend to talk fast, so hopefully it wasn't too fast.
Hey, Kristie, I'm just going through, I don't know when you actually stepped away from that role, but was it recently?
It was, praise the Lord, right before COVID.
Oh, good.
It was.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I made the decision in November, remember, and then COVID came in March. So I told our academic administration, and they made the announcement to our faculty in December, and then COVID hit in March.
Great, good for you.
I know. I would have never done it in the middle of a pandemic. So I did feel really fortunate. But.
So I just did something similar, like I had mentioned at the start of our call, just basically saying exactly what I need, because my children are also getting older, and it actually is way more difficult now than it was when they were babies. And so I'm actually moving down to 30 hours too, which is like unheard of, because they don't let anybody do that, but they're letting me do it. But that is why those statistics, I believe, haven't made a whole bunch of progress, right? We're
Right.
truly capable, and we're going to school at higher rates, and we're graduating from law school at higher rates, but we're making strategic decisions and we're prioritizing family first. And it doesn't matter if we're the breadwinner or not
No.
in most cases. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what you did when your children were infants is really interesting. I don't think a lot of people, I love it. I think that's something really different that I don't think a lot of moms would have made. So I actually like left the workforce during that time and then did like part-time development director work, which is not my field, but I'm like, well, if I could do this, I'm sure I could raise money too. But I did it part-time and I was at home because I didn't lean in and create a new story of success for myself because I thought there was just one way. And you showed that there isn't just one way. There's another way. So maybe if you could get people over that initial hump, that's one way to tackle, I think, changing those stats long term. But then you get through this second wave where your story has changed again, and now you're making a choice. But it's just so interesting. We just have so much more responsibility for our families, I believe. Like, I think it's just inherent in us, no matter how wonderful our husbands are. It's just.
Yeah. And whether we bring that on ourselves or not.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
you
I
could
do.
yeah, totally. I mean, you could almost call my husband like a second mom. Like he's
Sure.
so emotionally available. He's so available and he never asked me to step down. But I felt it. I don't want him going to the games without mom and hearing about the highlights. Like, it's us. And I think that's okay. But like you said, I think you're bringing up a great point. There's just these little differences in our stories. And I do think one thing people say to us, or at least I never heard anybody talk about how difficult it is when they get older. Everybody puts emphasis on that newborn stage. And that kind of that 0 to 2-year-old stage. And for us, I mean, I found, like I said, I mean, we found a balance that really worked. And I just didn't feel like they were missing out on me as much, but now they vocalize everything and they want you there. So yeah, I think and I was just talking to mom at the ball fields a couple of nights ago. Her husband is a doctor and she is a doctor. She just stepped down. She said, I tried part-time. I tried this. I tried contract. She's like, nothing works for me. And so, he's working full-time, keeps it, she went to med school and she's at home. It's just, these are the things. And I think you're absolutely right about representation. Women are brilliant and capable and have a different way of leading. They lead with head and heart. They really do. But, the next season will come after our kids move on. So I know women fear jumping back in, but I actually don't think we need to fear that as much as maybe was once a thing. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I don't know if we have any other questions or folks that want to share any experiences that they've had. Were you getting ready to say something?
I was going to say we've got a couple more minutes. So yeah, if anyone wants to share, now would be a time.
I'm catching up on Tuesday. Oh, yeah. Another mom had to just use a bottle only. Oh.
All right. Well, I guess kind of just conclude here. Again, Kristie gave you her contact information, so feel free to continue to have that conversation with her after this. But really just wanted to thank you, Dr. Wilder. We really are honored that you share this time with us. I know it's a busy week with graduation and everything, and just sharing your story and your perspective as a community leader, honestly. I think it was really important that you posed that question at the very beginning of why you're leading. I think to your point, really knowing your why and focusing on that, it's probably one of the most important steps in your leadership rebuild. So really appreciate you posing
Yeah.
And thank you everyone else for taking the time out of your busy day to be here, busy week, busy schedule, everything. I put in the chat there a brief link to a survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. We'll have that open for the next couple days. So please share your feedback. We're going to be taking a little bit of a break for the summer with these leadership studies. We'll resume them in the fall in September. So hopefully we will see you then. And don't worry if you missed anything, we will have this archived and I will share that link out with you all shortly. So thank you everybody again. Hope you have a wonderful week and summer, and we will see you all very soon.
Thank you,
Christina.
everyone.
Thanks, Rhea.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.